Many policies of the Trump administration are already being undermined by different judges. This includes several of the key policies of the administration, including actions of the DOGE department and also freezes on spending cuts, all the things through USAID and so on. A lot of this being blocked. And look, despite this, the Trump administration seems to be defying some of these orders while arguing that basically these undermine presidential authority. He's suggesting the judges are outside their jurisdiction by trying to do this. And in other news also, there are allegations that USAID was giving money to radical organizations, including to some that were funneling taxpayer dollars to politically polarizing movements tied to street protests, riots, and even to violence in the United States. And also in other news, Border Czar Tom Homan and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, they have suggested that recent leaks about ICE raids are being leaked by the FBI. We talked about these topics and more today, so let's jump into it. Now, look, first off, many policies of the Trump administration are now being openly challenged by judges, and this includes several of the key policies of the administration, including, the DOGE investigations looking into Medicare, Medicaid, putting freezes on departments. It includes them blocking some of the spending freezes. It includes holds on buyouts of federal employees and a lot of other issues. And look, despite this, it also appears the Trump administration is just not listening. They're defying some of these orders. They're listening maybe to an extent, but they're planning to go against these because they say they undermine the authority of the President of the United States and are unconstitutional. Now, as a brief overview, a judge appointed by Bill Clinton has blocked Trump's program to offer buyouts to federal employees. This is part of the offer that the administration has extended to every single government employee to quit their jobs in exchange for pay through September, currently on hold. An Obama-appointed judge in New Mexico has blocked the Trump administration from sending deported Venezuelans to Guantanamo Bay. And this is after the Trump administration rescinded a Biden-era policy that would have prevented the Venezuelans from being deported basically at all by extending their temporary protection status. And this is important too because Trump has designated even Tren de Aragua as a criminal organization, a terrorist organization, meaning he wants to send them to Guantanamo. That is currently being blocked. Also, Trump's executive order to end birthright citizenship was blocked by judges in Maryland, New Hampshire, and Washington State. And they are arguing that birthright citizenship has been affirmed by the Supreme Court. The Trump side argues the determination was only made for U.S. permanent residents. There was never actually a case to determine whether the children of illegal immigrants are actually U.S. citizens under that law. We never had a real case on that. Now, a judge in Washington, D.C., another one, appointed by Ronald Reagan this time, has blocked a Trump order that would have removed male prisoners from female prisons if the male prisoners say they're a woman. And apparently a lot of them have been saying they're women so they can go to female prisons. Also in Massachusetts, a Biden-appointed judge has blocked budget cuts that were underway for the NIH, the National Institute of Health. So far, 22 states have also sued to stop the cuts to how medical research grants are funded. And Trump administration, they're arguing that money is going to all these crazy programs. For example, doing gender transition experiments on animals and the like. And they're saying, why are we doing this? A judge in New York, appointed by Barack Obama, well, that judge has blocked the efforts of the DOGE department and also of the Treasury Secretary to access data of the Treasury Department. And they've also been ordered to destroy any evidence they've already obtained through their investigations. We'll see if they actually listen to it because Elon Musk and DOGE, they're alleging they've already uncovered about $100 billion in actual fraud. And why would they want to delete evidence of massive fraud of that scale? That's the argument from their side. Now look, on this, we see pushback from the Trump side as well. Some Republicans are now floating the idea of impeachment. In fact, you even have a couple people putting through some acts right now to possibly impeach some of these judges. And they note that in the United States, it is possible to impeach federal judges, especially the one who's blocking, for example, the investigations of the Treasury Department. They're already moving on that. Now, Elon Musk has issued a call to impeach the judge, blocking DOGE from investigating the Treasury Department as well. So he's also making a call on his side. And President Donald Trump has also gotten behind this. In fact, the administration has filed a motion to vacate the order. And Trump is also pushing DOGE to be able to continue its work without being blocked every time they start a new investigation. Now, look, with the overall debate right now, Jeffrey Tucker, president of the Brownstone Institute and a columnist with the Epoch Times, he wrote this. He said, pay attention to what has happened. Over the last days, several appointed federal judges on their own subjective judgment and using all their power have written pieces of paper that overruled the wishes of 74.2 million Americans who expressed their concerns, who express their will concerning the shape of the regime that rules them. Instead of, they say, permanent bureaucrats should rule all without any say from the voters who pay all the bills. That is called tyranny. Basically, he's suggesting these judges can, on a whim, basically block federal actions, including of the president, even if that president is a duly elected individual of the American people. Now, he also stated in a separate post, quote, the Supreme Court is going to have to rule soon on if there can be an actual president elected by the people or if this whole voting thing is just a fake veneer covering a permanent government. Suggesting basically that why do we even have elections if every random federal judge has more power than the president? And if the president has no real power to do anything, if judges are the ones who basically rule the country, then what is the American election? Who is the president? What is the executive branch? Why do we even have it if judges basically serve that purpose? Now, Elon Musk also commented on the post from Jeffrey Tucker, and he said this. He said, quote, we are witnessing an attempted coup of American democracy by radical left activists posing as judges. And Vice President J.D. Vance also commented on the many legal cases now starting. Here's what he had to say. He said, quote, if a judge tried to tell a general how to conduct a military operation, that would be illegal. If a judge tried to command the attorney general on how to use their discretion as a prosecutor, that's also illegal. Judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. And look, that argument from Vance, that's kind of the main line from the Trump administration in terms of their legal defense right? That is likely going to be the legal argument that will be made on these various cases as they work their way up through the entire legal circuit. And the main question, well, it goes to just how much authority the president actually has. Is he just a figurehead? Does he actually have power? Can he make executive orders and make them do things? Or do we just live at the whim of judges, right? Can judges throughout the country just block orders from the president? Well, we'll see. We'll find out. But look, this is also bringing up some debate over how similar issues were handled during the Biden administration, right? Because people would say, well, didn't some Trump-elected judges or appointed judges, didn't they do the same thing? Wasn't the Biden administration being blocked by the Supreme Court? Didn't the Supreme Court justices appointed by Trump, weren't they just ruling by decree and doing whatever they want? Well, people are pointing to a comparison to how Biden handled that. And a comparison to Trump's current defiance to judge orders, right? Elon Musk pointed to a tweet from former President Joe Biden himself. This is Joe Biden, the former president, when he was still in office. And in a post, Musk wrote, quote, this was a gem. And the Biden tweet said this, quote, the Supreme Court tried to block me from relieving student debt, but they didn't stop me. I've relieved student debt for over 5 million Americans. I'm going to keep going. Now look, as some background on this, the Supreme Court determined that Biden's student debt forgiveness program was not legal. They deemed that it was illegal for him to do that. But Biden continued doing that regardless of even the Supreme Court making a ruling on it. In fact, this was from CNBC on this from January 2024. It said the Supreme Court's conservative majority in June ruled that President Joe Biden did not have the authority to cancel student debt for millions of Americans, and then it said he's still trying. And what one legal scholar described as a very direct confrontation with the court. Funny how they called it a direct confrontation then, and they call it a legal violation now. In a very direct confrontation with the court, Biden held a press briefing from the White House just hours after the justices issued their verdict, and said, quote, "Today's decision has closed one path. Now we're going to pursue another." And it says that alternative plan, which has become known as Biden's Plan B, where he just kept doing the same thing, could forgive student debt for as many as 10 million people, according to one estimate. The president may try to deliver that relief before November. And it added that in addition to the president's second attempt to deliver sweeping student loan cancellation, the U.S. Department of Education, under his tenure, has made a number of improvements to the government's current debt forgiveness programs. As a result of those changes, more than 3.7 million Americans have received loan cancellation, totaling $136 billion in aid. Now look, basically, Biden defied the actual Supreme Court, the law of the land, the highest body of law. Trump's going against right now some of the lower level judges, including just like circuit judges. And of course, with that, he's being accused of massive violations of the law. If it goes to the Supreme Court, we can assume that this actually will become law of the land, depending on, well, how they determine the presidential power, how far it actually reaches. Until then, we're going to be seeing a lot of back and forth with Trump and all of these judges right now trying to block just about everything he's doing. Now, look, in light of this, we're also seeing something else, though. While the Trump administration is making some legal challenges to the court orders, in some cases, they also appear to just be ignoring the orders altogether, kind of like Biden did with the Supreme Court, in fact. The main battleground on this, at least in terms of Trump ignoring the orders seemingly, well, it's around the order on Trump putting a freeze on around $3 trillion in federal funds. And despite that order, well, it's now being reported that Trump has not yet lifted the freeze. The Trump side, right now, they're arguing that the judge's order is unconstitutional, while the other side argues that, look, if the Trump administration tries to weigh the law themselves, then they risk being in contempt of the court, meaning you're breaking the law, frankly. Now, BBC said this. It said the Trump administration has violated a court order by refusing to reverse a freeze in billions of government funds. A judge ruled Monday. The ruling, it says, was the latest challenge to sweeping White House plans to cut costs and remake the U.S. government. And it adds that U.S. District Judge John McConnell Jr. previously ruled that the government should continue to fund programs authorized by Congress. And that's a bit ironic because the programs were not really authorized by Congress. The budgets were for the departments, but we're finding out that money was being spent in ways we never thought it was being spent as. Now, like it says that on Monday, he said the White House had defied a preliminary injunction that the judge issued after 23 Democratic state attorneys general filed a lawsuit to stop the funding freeze. The Trump administration said it would appeal the ruling. And on January 28th, it says President Trump signed an order that initially froze hundreds of billions of federal funds, a move that the president said was a short-term measure to hunt for waste and fraud. And the White House has said rescinded a memo that outlined more detail on what would be frozen, but said it was still planning to halt funding. It notes that Trump spokeswoman Karoline Leavitt said the executive order remained in effect and the White House would continue to pursue a broad funding freeze and cut funds for gender issues and diversity programs, meaning DEI. And look, basically, this debate also goes just beyond the funding freeze. Cato Institute, for example, they listed out some of the other issues in a report, and of course, left wing, they say this. In its early executive orders and actions, the Trump administration has regularly taken steps that go beyond what standard legal opinion would have to be its authority. Some would argue Biden did the same thing, frankly, but they add this. This weekend, according to news reports, the administration indicated that it is dissolving the U.S. Agency for International Development, possibly folding some of its functions into the State Department. Remember, that's USAID. Even though a 1998 law establishes USAID as a standalone entity that cannot be that's just conjured away, it says. It notes that Jack Goldsmith, former head of the Department of Justice's Office of Legal Counsel, compiled a list last week with examples of Trump's actions that either exceed the Supreme Court's current conceptions of the limits of presidential power, or at least are very aggressive and contested assertions of presidential power. Basically, they have a whole list of things they say Trump is violating the law on. And for example, it says this: the TikTok ban delay reflects a controversial and not obviously lawful conception of presidential enforcement discretion. Remember, the Biden administration, it actually went through Congress. It went through the House, it went through the Senate, it was signed by President Biden at the time, and the Supreme Court even heard a case challenging it. Trump overruled it and kept TikTok in place, right? It notes the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, the Paris Climate Accord, is contrary to prior executive branch views of presidential agreement termination authority. Some would argue that the Paris Climate Accord was a violation of the law itself. And why is that? It's because you cannot create an accord like that. You can't have an international agreement like that without a 2/3 vote from Congress. But rather than call it an international, treaty or something like that, they call it an accord. That was an Obama loophole they came up with, where they just call it something else. Under the Constitution, you cannot do that. You can't create a global agreement, a global accord, I guess, or anything like that, because normally that would fall under the definition of a treaty. Treaties need a 2/3 vote by Congress. Trump pulled us out of it. They're saying you violated the law by doing it. It also adds this: yesterday's freeze of nearly all grants and federal loans, though nominally limited to the extent permissible under applicable law, foreshadows the much telegraphed and almost certainly unconstitutional Trumpian Article 2 impoundment theory. It's funny here because they're actually suggesting Trump did not violate the law by that. He's actually within his authority, but they're suggesting it is a kind of preemptive move of something that they believe could possibly be unconstitutional. They also say Trump's gambit to fire career civil servants rests on a conception of Article 2 that goes beyond the Supreme Court's already generous removal precedents. Some people point out that how many people were fired under the Biden administration for refusing to get a vaccine, violating their own, bodily rights. Well, a lot of them. Was it legal for them to fire people for doing that? Was it legal for them to fire people who refused to do DEI trainings? Was it illegal for them to fire people if, for example, they refused to acknowledge something that violated their religious rights or their own personal moral values? Well, a lot of people were fired. And so it raises the question of, well, was it legal then? Is it legal now? Well, we'll see. It also notes, and relatedly, several of Trump's actions violate other provisions under the Constitution, such as the birthright citizenship order. And again, they're arguing it's a violation of the Constitution. We will see the argument for the Trump side is the court precedent only had to do with U.S. permanent residents, not illegal immigrants. And we will see whether that same law applies to the children of illegal immigrants, the same as, well, legal residents, right? Now, it also notes that more potential issues could be added to the list. They're just alleging Trump is just on a roll, violating everything. But overall, the debate is hitting on something important. Just how much authority does a president have? And look, even with that, how broad can executive orders from a president be? Well, Barack Obama kind of established that during his second term in office. And he showed it was pretty dang broad. And we're seeing now if that applies to conservative presidents as well. We're also seeing this with spending through FEMA, though, right? Where, look, it also seems Trump's, his freeze on funds is happening there as well, regardless of an order from a judge. NBC News said this yesterday. A senior official of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, instructed subordinates to freeze funding for a wide array of grant programs Monday, just hours after a federal judge ordered the Trump administration for the second time to stop such pauses. Even after being warned twice, they're still doing it. And it's in an email with the subject line, urgent holds on awards. Stacy Street, the director of the agency's Office of Grant Administration, told her team to freeze funding for grant programs going back several years, including those focused on emergency preparedness, homeland security, firefighting, protecting churches from terrorism, and tribal security, according to NBC. It notes as well that public servants across federal agencies now find themselves caught between Donald Trump's executive orders and federal judges who have blocked them, at least temporarily, until the courts can more fully determine whether the president has exceeded his legal authority. Because basically these are just judge opinions and they're doing everything they want based on opinion. Now notice they face firing by the Trump administration if they defy him, and potential legal sanctions if they don't. So these government officials are caught between a rock and a hard place. Look, on the other side of this all kind of raises some additional questions though. To what extent can judges at various levels just block orders from the president? What if the judge has potential conflicts of interest, as has actually been alleged in many of these cases? For example, where a judge may have a direct family member who is directly benefiting from this money and could be harmed directly by a Trump policy. What happens then? Conflict of interest. What about issues like investigating fraud and corruption? Can a judge prevent the president from investigating fraud or corruption? What if the judge is involved? Or what about if a national emergency has been declared, if American lives are on the line, like with the border crisis and fentanyl? Can any judge just block orders when a crisis has been declared? What about, during wartime? Can judges just block the president from moving troops or carrying out orders? Well, that's a big question, right? Now, we really don't have the answers to all these questions just yet because, as we saw over the last 4 years, we're seeing things that have never happened before. But the current legal challenges of alleged overreach and the public debate on that, well, that's now starting as the country is being told of alleged waste and massive fraud. Hundreds of billions in fraud being uncovered by the DOGE department and likely going to get resolved maybe eventually, right? Although it's possible some of these cases will need to go to the Supreme Court before we get any solid answers on this. It very likely, at least in my take, these cases are just going to delay things. They probably will not stop them. At the very most, they may shrink the scope of some of these operations. And look, even with that, what happens, I would say, if the Trump administration chooses to defy what some regard as unconstitutional orders in the meantime? If the judges themselves are acting outside the law? What if the judges are the ones violating the law? Do they get held to account? Well, we may also soon get our answers on that. Elon Musk is raising this issue, as is Trump, and so we may see. Now, look, in addition to all of this, there are also allegations that others may be violating orders from the president. In fact, officials are being accused of refusing executive orders. They're just not carrying them out. Others are finding workarounds to defy the president. Some are openly stating their intent, just saying they're going to do it, to defy the president's orders, even through their jobs. And even some aid organizations are being accused of violating presidential orders, in particular, as it relates to the funding freeze now being debated between Donald Trump and the courts. Now, you could argue on one side of this, well, people are kind of having to decide which side do they follow. Do you follow Trump's orders or do you follow the judge's orders? What are you going to do? Now, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is also acting director of USAID. He raised this issue during a recent speech, and he noted there are some exemptions to the freeze. Not everything is being frozen in terms of funding. But also, he noted some groups appear to be violating this. Watch.
I issued a blanket waiver that said if this is life-saving programs, okay, if it's providing food or medicine or anything that is saving lives and is immediate and urgent, you're not included in the freeze. I don't know how much more clear we can be than that. And I would say if some organization is receiving funds from the United States and does not know how to apply a waiver, then I have real questions about the competence of that organization. Or I wonder whether they're deliberately sabotaging it for purposes of making a political point. I want to repeat what I've said. I have long supported foreign aid. I continue to support foreign aid. But foreign aid is not charity. It exists for the purpose of advancing the national interest of the United States. Every dollar we will spend, as long as I'm Secretary of State, and as long as President Trump is in the White House, is going to be a dollar that's advancing our national interest. And you see this here today. These are programs that work. This is the kind of foreign aid we need to do. And there are programs that we have questions about that do not further the national interest, and they should be eliminated.
Remember, part of the funding freeze applies to programs of foreign aid. A lot of that goes through USAID. There's other things as well. But look, some of the programs are things like medical programs or funding to build schools. And Democrats are more focused on those types of issues. The other programs are the ones Republicans have been pointing to, the DEI programs, the funding for trans performances, money for gender changes in Latin America, and a whole lot of money for activist and radical organizations that have been accused of working as leftist slush funds. What Secretary Rubio is noting is that exemptions on the freeze, those are being given to issues that involve key medical programs and the like. But he's also suggesting some organizations are defying that freeze on the non-vital or politicized issues as well. Meaning, the stuff that Democrats say they're concerned about, the medical programs and things of that nature, those things are still being funded. But what they are cutting funding to is all the crazy radical political stuff. And look, in other news, there are allegations right now that USAID was giving money to radical organizations, including to some that were funneling taxpayer dollars, your money, to politically polarizing movements, and some very extreme ones, actually. I'll be talking more about this after we come back from a 1-minute break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. There were allegations that USAID was funneling taxpayer dollars to very radical organizations and movements. And look, this includes money, taxpayer dollars, to some very polarizing things like the street protests, the riots, even groups tied to violence on the streets and even murders. Just one example, people are pointing to the Tides Center, which is accused of being one of the main forces behind Black Lives Matter. The Post-Millennial said this: the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, issued a $24.7 million grant to the George Soros-funded Tides Center, which then funneled millions of taxpayer funds to the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020. Tides granted more than $12.6 million from its Black Lives Matter support fund to help support BLM grassroots during the height of racial justice riots following the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And that's that BLM Grassroots is an organization that works with local Black Lives Matter chapters and similar racial justice groups. The notes the discovery was revealed after the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation sued the Tides Center in California last year, accusing the nonprofit of withholding $33 million in donations to the foundation. It notes as well that Tides was forced to issue a clarification that the funds were intended for BLM Grassroots, which is a distinct organization separate from BLM, GNF, and other racial justice groups. And as at Tides, which manages roughly $1.4 billion in assets, said the amount awarded was $12.6 million, according to a statement issued to Bloomberg. The Black Lives Matter anti-police racial justice riots caused billions of dollars worth of damage to cities across the United States in 2020. They also killed people and, of course, burned down businesses and so on. Now, there are a lot of similar allegations to this as well. Author and journalist Michael Shellenberger is also alleging there could be a connection between USAID money and the push for the first impeachment of then-President Donald Trump in his first term in office.
The House of Representatives impeached President Donald Trump in December 2019 after a White House whistleblower went public with evidence that Trump had abused his powers by withholding military aid to Ukraine in order to dig up dirt on his rival Joe Biden. In the complaint, the whistleblower claimed to have heard from White House staff that Trump had, on a phone call, directed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to work with his personal attorney at the time, Rudy Giuliani, to investigate Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. The The whistleblower who triggered the impeachment was a CIA analyst who was first brought into the White House by the Obama administration. Reporting by Dropsite News last year revealed that the CIA analyst had relied on reporting by a supposedly independent investigative news organization called the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, or the OCCRP, which appears to have effectively operated as an arm of the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, which President Trump has just shut down. The CIA whistleblower complaint cited a long report by OCCRP 4 times.
This goes back to the whistleblower complaint from 2019, and that complaint was one of the key triggers behind the investigations and the case that did in fact lead to the Democratic-controlled House to impeach the then President of the United States, Donald Trump. And look, it's also the case that the complaint used the report from the OCCRP as one of the sources to make those claims. In fact, that report goes back to July of 2019. And that could be pretty problematic. The About Us page of that group, OCCRP, even openly states it is, in fact, funded by USAID. And it's also funded from the George Soros Open Society Fund. It says this openly. It's not a big conspiracy. This is the actual About Us page. It says, quote, OCCRP is funded by USAID and the Open Society Fund. This is not some conspiracy, right? And this seems to be a trend as well. As Just the News noted in a recent piece, quote, before it was shuttered, USAID routed funds to Soros-aligned causes, terrorists, and drag queens. The report shows that many initiatives under the Open Society Foundation, Soros, they received a lot of money from USAID. And this is, of course, these are just a few examples that Republicans in particular have been pointing to while expressing their concerns over how taxpayer money was being spent. And this is also tying into their arguments on whether that money should be frozen until the spending undergoes a more thorough review. Because many of these same organizations getting all of this taxpayer money are the same organizations going out and protesting on the street against, again, one side of the political aisle. These are many of the same groups that protested, undermined, attacked conservatives, tried to did impeach the President of the United States. And why is taxpayer money funding that? Right? That's the big question. Now, on the Democrat side as well, others are arguing that Trump, Musk, and just about everyone around him also have their own conflicts of interest. And among the contenders on that side is Senator Adam Schiff. He wrote on X on Monday, quote, this morning, I sent a letter to the Office of Government Ethics, the OGE, regarding Elon Musk's potential conflicts of interest. And he notes that within minutes, the White House confirmed receipt. By noon, President Trump fired the director of OGE. He says, I want to know, was this to prevent his answer? Maybe Trump believed they were acting in cahoots. Who knows? With all this said, though, the public is now getting a chance to see where our money has been going this whole time. The Trump side, he's even alleging right now that if we were to get rid of the fat, if we were to get rid of the fraud, if we were to get rid of the political activism, we would potentially be spending within our means. We would not be going into debt. He's alleging the amount of fraud and misuse they've already uncovered is enough to get America out of the red and stop going deeper and deeper and deeper into debt. He's alleging basically we've just been robbed this whole time and we didn't know it. And look, on this side too, the political and legal battle around these cases will also likewise determine whether or not the funding, all this money, all these programs tied to that money, whether or not they can continue. Because right now, that's the real battle. The lawyers, the judges, the Democrat side, they're basically arguing the president does not have the authority to just get rid of federal agencies. The president does not have the authority to just fire whoever he wants. And they're arguing the president does not have the authority to just, put freezes on budgets that have already been allocated. And they're saying, put it all back, delete all of your evidence, put the genie back in that bottle and pretend you never saw it because it's going to stay there. That's what they're saying. The Trump side, though, they're saying that no, all this is illegal, we're uncovering fraud, and how can you dare try to block us from exposing this? That's the two different arguments. Now on that side, folks, as well, border czar Tom Homan, he is suggesting that recent leaks about ICE raids, the leaks, he says, are coming from somebody in the FBI. He made these comments on Fox News' Hannity. Watch this.
Some of the information we're receiving tends to lead toward the FBI. But I talked to the Deputy Attorney General all this weekend. They've opened up a criminal investigation, and they have promised that not only this person lose their job and lose their pension, they're going to go to jail. They're going to criminally prosecute. So we're all over it. It's just not, giving the bad guys a heads up so they can escape apprehension. Right? We're arresting, giving, the Venezuela gang a heads up so we can't arrest them. You're putting officers' lives at risk. It's only a matter of time if we walk into a place where there's going to be a bad guy doesn't care. He's going to be sitting and wait for the officers to show up and ambush him. This is not a game. So DHS and DOJ are connected at the hip to hold these people responsible in a criminal fashion.
Now, the Epoch Times did some additional reporting on this, made some phone calls. This is what we had at the Epoch Times. It says this. Earlier in the week, Noam posted a Los Angeles Times article on social media platform X and then suggested that the FBI was leaking information to the media. The article she referenced from the LA Times cited an alleged internal document and reported that ICE would partake in a major deportation operation targeting illegal immigrants in Los Angeles. It notes as well that weeks before that, media outlets had reported that ICE would target Chicago, which was referenced by Homan in an interview last month with the Washington Post. It notes Homan did not provide any more information about the leaks or why he and other officials believe they are coming from the FBI. We don't know what evidence they have saying came from the FBI. It notes the Epoch Times contacted the FBI's National Press Office for comment on Wednesday, but did not receive a response by publication time. It notes as well, though, that over the past weekend, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi told Fox News that the Department of Justice is going after potential leakers. They're trying to find out where this is coming from. We may see some individuals criminally charged. Remember, the FBI is under the Justice Department, and Pam Bondi now has authority over that. We will see what happens. That said, folks, hit the like button, leave a comment. Let's jump into some questions. Real quick also, I was at the barber the other day. One sec. I was at the barber the other day, and we got my hair cut, as you can see, and they had the TV on, and I think they had CBS on, and they were talking about Trump, cutting budgets and putting freezes on things, and USAID and government officials, the Democrats protesting in front of the Education Department and USAID. I found it really interesting because the segment they had on that did not provide a single argument of what the Trump administration says they're finding. They did not give a single slice of evidence of fraud or waste or what the programs were actually, shutting down were. They were not giving any information on the money they were finding, the $100 billion or, $50 billion at least in fraud with Medicare and Medicaid. They didn't tell any of this. It was totally one-sided, and basically they just made it sound like Trump was just, shuttering departments and basically doing whatever he wanted. They didn't give any evidence. It was crazy. I mean, I was watching this. I was like, man, is this where people get their news sometimes? No wonder people think like they do. Imagine if you were watching the news and you're not being given any evidence of different arguments, and that's your entire worldview. There are people like that. I was mind-blowing to see this, actually. Anyways, folks, real quick on Tom Homan as well, where he's saying that, remember there's a few examples of this. Tom Homan, the border czar, he's basically saying, again, they believe somebody in the FBI is leaking information about upcoming raids whenever they're planning on going to an area and trying to go after gang members or illegal immigrants. They're mostly targeting what they call the worst of the worst right now. Murderers, rapists, other criminals, and gangs, right? They're going after those types. They're going to these areas, and you have media, the Washington Post, I believe it was, the LA Times, And then, of course, there was this George Soros-controlled Spanish language radio station that was even giving live updates on the locations of ICE, cars. These individuals are basically giving a heads up to these criminal organizations. And Tom Homan is suggesting that's putting his officers' lives at risk, because if they go and raid like a Tren de Aragua, apartment complex or whatever, these guys are armed. These guys may defend themselves, and if they don't want to go to Guantanamo Bay or some hug your friend facility in El Salvador, they might defend themselves. They might just want to die rather than do that. And so that is something he's talking about right now. Anyways, first question, Ashley from California, you're saying, I understand checks and balances in our government, but I thought the SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, was the judicial branch to hold the executive and legislation branch in check, and that if they interpret laws, not block audits of corruption and firings. Yeah, well, this is one of the issues, right? And I've made this point before. When Biden was president, and you had, of course, Florida and Texas defying a lot of his orders. A lot of conservatives supported that, right? When Trump was president the first time around, and you had California and New York defying a lot of Trump's orders, it was kind of the same thing. The difference I think you have between the Trump administration and the Biden administration is this. When Trump was president, and is president now, what you're having is judges not just challenging the orders, you have them putting injunctions on Trump's orders and basically trying to freeze the executive branch from doing its job. Whereas when Biden was president, you didn't really have like national freezes on policies. You didn't have that happening. You didn't have a Florida judge freezes Biden's entire DEI initiative. You did not have, Texas judge freezes Biden's entire initiative of facilitating mass illegal immigration. You never saw anything like that. You didn't have some random judge somewhere believing they could put a freeze on a presidential order and have it apply to the entire nation. That did not happen. And so why is it we're seeing that happen now? And again, when Biden was president, you did see some pushback, but a lot of that was local level. They're saying that Texas will not follow this order, and then the Biden administration would immediately sue, and it would go through the legal system within the state before making its way up to the Supreme Court. And even a lot of times when it made its way to the Supreme Court ruling only applied to local law. It was not like law of the land type stuff. And even then, the Biden administration was openly defying a lot of Supreme Court orders, as were a lot of states. Even, for example, a lot of the gun laws, the Supreme Court actually has made pretty big rulings that give really broad access to firearms, and you have states just choosing to not recognize those rights. And that's kind of the question we're in right now, right? Why is it that you have these judges who believe that they can not only challenge things, but also stop things until their challenges work their, snail crawl their way up through the court system? And, it's kind of like an exercise of authority and extent of authority. Can like the hundreds upon hundreds of circuit judges across the country just do whatever they want? Can any judge in any random place at any given moment just put a freeze on the President of the United States? I mean, that's kind of where we're at right now. Or does it only apply like they filed the case and then it has to go to the Supreme Court before the court can determine whether or not it can happen? Now, oftentimes the way it does go is this. Things get frozen, it goes up to the appeals court, it gets unfrozen, it goes another level, it gets frozen, it goes up another level, it gets frozen, right? It freezes, then unfreezes, then freezes, then unfreezes like that. But usually it's not like just day one frozen. Usually there has to be at least some legal process to actually put a freeze on things. And I think what we're seeing now is just they're kind of ruling by a decree from the judicial level. Well, and again, maybe we'll get answers on this. I do think the Trump side, they want clarification, and this will be interesting. The Trump side is saying they want clarification on the extent of powers of all these judges. And what is also being raised now, Elon Musk, you even have one member of Congress filing articles of impeachment against one of these federal judges. They're also asking whether these judges could be held to account. If a judge exceeds his or her judicial power, is there any punishment for it? What is preventing a judge from doing this over and over and over again? Even if they're determined to be violating the extent of their own power. Is that legal? Is there any repercussion for that? What can be done about it? Is there anything to hold them to account? So far, it does not appear so, other than impeachment. But that is also something that the Trump side wants clarification on as well, so maybe we'll see. Thena Leones, you're saying, Josh, 2 questions. Do you know when the vote for Kash Patel will happen? Tomorrow. Kash is going to be voted on tomorrow. It was supposed to happen last week. The Democrats delayed it. It's happening this week, and tomorrow is the day where we will know possibly whether Kash Patel becomes the head of the FBI or not. You're also saying, should President Trump just fire those employees versus his offer for a buyout? In my understanding, so before Trump left office, his first term, right, he did put in place some different laws that would allow him to fire government employees. It used to not be possible to do that, especially like middle management bureaucrats. That could still be debated. I don't know if any of you ever worked in a management position or like a business. It's really hard to fire people. It's really hard to fire somebody. And you almost have to go through an entire legal process where you have to, give them warnings and then give them chances, and you have to document it, and you have to have stuff showing what they were violating, what they were doing wrong. And if you don't do that, they can sue you, and they can get payment for basically as long as you would have hired them for. I've heard managers compare the difficulty of firing somebody as being almost like a divorce, right? Like the amount of paperwork you need, the amount of documentation, the headache you get from it. And if you do it wrong, you're going to be paying that person for who knows how long, right? You got to pay them alimony for the next 20 years or something, right? It's a very difficult process. Yeah, Ashley, you're saying, what about laid off? Yeah, there's other ways you can do it. You could lay them off too. But I think what Trump is doing right now, he probably could fire them, especially if they're defying orders, especially, frankly, even with the DEI stuff, you could probably get them on civil rights violations because, the Trump side now, they're arguing that even discriminating against white people or men or straight people or Christians, right? Any of that could also be a type of discrimination, and you could be fired for that. You could fire somebody for that. And frankly, a lot of the DEI stuff, frankly, just openly discriminates against Christians, men, straight people, and white people. So it's kind of easy to fire people on that. And he has been firing people on that, by the way. He's been firing, and the left is kind of freaking out about it. He is firing people who attended like certain DEI trainings. He's firing people who are involved in some of those things because on the civil rights side, it's easier. At least in my interpretation, it's easier to fire them. If he just buys them out, saying, okay, we'll pay you through September if you quit. That's like offering a nice severance package. In businesses sometimes, they might be like, all right, folks, volunteers, we have to cut 200 jobs. Who wants to go? We'll give you a nice severance package if you accept it. That happens sometimes, right? That's kind of what he's doing right now. The other easy way to do it would be they just dissolve an entire agency. But as the Democrats are noting, you do need a congressional process to get rid of agencies. Not all of them, because some of them were created through executive order, meaning the president kind of could just dissolve some agencies. The FBI, for example, was created through an executive order. I don't think Trump's going to get rid of it, But just as an example of that, right? And that is also an option he could have. Let's see, SJL, you're saying, are we seeing the result of previous government ethics? Yeah, right. Well, this is kind of one of the ironic parts we're seeing right now, is that the Biden administration, they did a lot of things that were unprecedented. They did a lot of things that had never been done before. There were a lot of things, again, even like most of the Trump charges were novel interpretations of laws. We never saw laws interpreted the way that they were used before. For example, with the J6ers and disrupting an official proceeding. The Supreme Court later determined it was a false interpretation of the law, but it took them like 3.5 years to do that? You had people sitting in solitary confinement for, 3 years before the Supreme Court determined that it was unlawful. That was ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. A lot of the election law changes were unprecedented. We never saw many of the things that happened in 2020 happen before. Maybe we'll never see them happen again. You could use COVID as the excuse for that. The vaccine mandates, the mask mandates, the various things on that was all unprecedented. We never saw that type of thing happen. Well, technically we did during the 1920s, around that time, we saw some of that. But a lot of these things are novel interpretations. And I would actually say that even for the Biden administration, the DEI stuff, the ESG stuff, the mandates where you have to have anti-racist training or white supremacy awareness training, or are you a straight enemy of the people or training? I don't know what they even call them. That kind of stuff. And frankly, where people were being discriminated against. If you were a Christian and those types of behaviors go against your religious values, that was, religious discrimination. You were being forced to acknowledge morals that violate your religion. For that kind of stuff, that was allowed. And anybody who voiced concern about it could be fired. Anybody who did not want their kids being, forced to hear these things in schools. You had kids being expelled from schools over this stuff. You had kids being forced, oftentimes against their will, or even against the religious values of their parents, being forced to listen to really kind of extreme, sexual education programs. And you weren't even allowed to opt out of it in some states, like in California, for example, which... If you learn what they're actually teaching kids, basically they have this kind of all-encompassing sex ed program where they normalize everything. Stuff I've never even heard of. If you were to go back in time to ancient Rome and Emperor Nero, good old corrupt Nero, and you were to show him the types of sex ed textbooks that kids are being shown in California, Nero himself would have been like, oh my gosh, you guys are making kids do that? Nero would have been shocked by it. You know what I mean? You could go back to the Roman orgies and show them these things and oh, that's disgusting. It was wild stuff. It was crazy stuff. And for a lot of people that violates their moral values and religious values. You know what I mean? And so, yeah. You could argue the Biden administration made a lot of precedents in terms of how they did that kind of stuff that really broadly interpreted the powers of the executive branch. And you could argue that Trump is just kind of piggybacking on, hey, you had those powers and so do I. But again, we'll see because these judges are trying to block it right now. Another question here. James Dyson, you're saying, Josh, I have one number to mention relative to everything you just said. 1984. Yeah, right? I think we've gone beyond 1984 already. I think we've extended beyond that already. I was actually thinking about this the other day. I was like, what did 1984 really warn us about? Mass propaganda. All the media is controlled by a centralized authority. Maybe we're not that far yet, but I will say that anybody who's not controlled by it, has been massively censored or attacked. You know what I mean? I'm glad we can have this show. I'm glad we can broadcast. But frankly, if I wasn't with Epoch Times, I probably couldn't make a living as a journalist because I'm censored everywhere. I'm demonetized. You know what I mean? It's really hard to be an independent journalist because they attack you like crazy. But you know, if you go with the media, yeah, look at how many we just found out were getting bankrolled to some extent by government money. It's crazy. You did have this kind of big apparatus funneling a lot of money to fact checkers and international media and everything else. And again, it's this echo chamber, and they're all spouting out the same narratives and same, frankly, nonsense, right? It was this propaganda state. Orwell also warned about the surveillance state. On the surveillance side, we have very, very far exceeded everything Orwell warned about. The extent of Orwell's warning was kind of this all-encompassing surveillance state where like the telescreens watched you. You know, you watch the TV watches you back. That was kind of his whole thing. Look, we're at a point now where in terms of data collection, if you have a smartphone, your app, not even just the phone itself and the carrier and the ISP, but even the apps you have installed monitor you, even when you're not using your phone. Video recording, audio recording, you know, they use it for advertisements, but they also sell it to governments, including in our country and other countries. They access your text messages, they access all of your messages are technically available for court review. Every text message you have ever sent, every email you have ever sent, even every phone call you make, everything is being, well, I don't know about phone calls, but everything else is being recorded. And, you know, you see people who go to court, what becomes the evidence in court? It's your text messages, it's your emails, it's your geolocation. This is actually huge in law enforcement these days, where they can track your phone and your location. And so, you know, they don't have to be like, where were you on the night of the 5th? They just pull up your geolocation data for the night of the 5th, and they say, why was your phone at the scene of the crime on this date? You know what I mean? I mean, on one side, you could say, great, better law enforcement. On the other side, you could say that we no longer have privacy. And then, you know, of course, you get into the other systems where, in terms of this, you know, erasing history, rewriting history. Look at New York Times and the 1619 Project, a complete falsification of American history being taught to our kids in schools. We have already gone far beyond everything that George Orwell warned about. It's crazy. When you look at the full picture of it, it is crazy. And I would argue too that it's not just government. A lot of it is it's private sector. You know, it's these big tech businesses and so on, and kind of like this globalist system that requires access to all that data. You know, we've kind of willfully, although maybe not fully understand the implications, just handed it all over, and this is where we are. Gina Mikulik, you're saying, isn't it illegal to interfere or obstruct law enforcement? Yes, it is. And actually, so you're talking about Tom Homan saying that there are FBI leakers who are providing media organizations and who knows who else with information on ICE raids. And ICE, of course, Immigration Enforcement, they're focused mostly on criminals right now. They're going after gangs like Tren de Aragua and so on. In fact, they just arrested like 100 of them. And yeah, if people are telling those gangs, hey, ICE is coming, hide, get out of town, you are violating the law. And on that point too, that's what Tom Homan is saying. He's saying he's working with the Justice Department right now. He's saying that, again, Justice Department does have oversight of the FBI. So if Kristi Noem and Tom Homan are, you know, accurate, that it's coming from within there, whoever is leaking this could face criminal charges. I don't know if the journalists could too, because, you know, they're using the media for it. The FCC, Federal Communications Commission, they are also investigating one of the Spanish language radio stations that was purchased, you know, under George Soros, that was also leaking the locations of the ICE vehicles. They're also being investigated. They could lose their broadcasting license, at least that one radio station. And so we will see. On that point, Tom Homan has repeatedly threatened legal action against leakers and people trying to block these activities and so on. We've seen a lot of leaks. We've seen a lot of people blocking the activities. We've seen a lot of local officials saying they're going to block it. We've seen a lot of that. And as far as I know, we have not yet seen a single arrest. So we'll see on that. But also, to his point, we're also only 3 weeks in. I know this has been kind of a breakneck speed 3 weeks, but it's good to remember we're only 3 weeks into the Trump administration. These things have technically barely started. And so, it usually takes a little more than 3 weeks to press criminal charges like that. They need to build the cases and so on. So we will see. We'll see if anything happens. They are saying they will arrest people for doing these types of things. Again, we'll watch and see if it happens, right? That said, folks, join me tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, as one of you mentioned as well. Dana Leon's asking, Kash Patel's nomination is tomorrow. We'll see if it happens or not. He could become the new head of the FBI, possibly. I'll be, again, covering all this stuff, folks, so join me again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. That said, please share this episode. Give us a like. It does help us quite a bit. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.